Good morning. Welcome everyone for our Azure Verified Modules community call. It's 8 a.m. UK time, 9 a.m. for me. I'm based in France. My name is Charlie Grabio. I'm one of the PMs, program managers for AVM. We have a lot of people already on the call, a lot of presenters. Actually, I'm going to introduce them to you, and a lot of attendees. So we'll give 1 more minute to attendees to join. But I quickly checked this morning, and 326 people had registered. So usually not everybody is joining live because this will anyway be recorded. But it's great to have so many people joining us. Before I start presenting everyone and so on, just a quick reminder. When you join this event, some of your your name, your email address, phone number, and so on may be viewable. You can modify your name, by the way. You probably saw that, but by joining, you're agreeing to this experience. Now, this event will be recorded. It will share, as usual, on YouTube through YouTube. If you're not comfortable, with this experience, then of course you can drop now, and then you can watch the recording after. But of course, if you stay, then it will be easier to submit your questions. Okay. So let's get started because we have a packed agenda. Just before I show you the agenda, some of you who already joined the previous call know the core team, but we have great team members across the globe. Some of them are live with us right now. Some are probably sleeping due to the time zone difference. But we have many subject matter experts: Alex, Bilal, Chris, Erica, Jack, Jared, John, Matt, Rainer, Sebastian, and Rode, and the program managers, Mate, Pankaj, and myself. The agenda should be quite interesting and is quite packed. We'll start with an overview of the website update that Mate led, and Mate recorded a quick demo of it because he's based on the West Coast, so he cannot join us this morning. Then Alex and Jared will talk about the Chime modules implementations, that some of it is available today and what's coming next. Erica will then talk about OpenID Connect, specifically on Bicep. We'll have our first external speaker then, Brett Miller. We'll talk about inner sourcing for Bicep as well. Then we'll talk about platform landing zone and how AVM loves ALZ, and how ALZ loves AVM. So we'll have Jared, Matt, and Jack. Actually, Jack cannot join us. He has an emergency this morning, so he cannot join us live, but we have a recording from him, so we'll use that. And then our second external speakers from Entity, Reza and Mike will join us to share their experience using AVM, and René will conclude this call, sharing the latest updates for Bicep and Terraform. We might run, we might need more than 1 hour, but of course it's recorded. So if you cannot stay more than 1 hour, please catch up with the recording. So with that, let me start with the first topic, which is the update of the recent update of our website. Yeah, you might have seen that already, but Mate is going to show us that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mate Barabash. I'm one of the PMs behind Azure Verified Modules. And in this video today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the updates we recently introduced to our public website. Now, let me start with the most important thing. As we are using this new theme, we do have dark mode. So if you take a look at the bottom left corner,
excuse me.
There is this paintbrush icon here. And if you click on it, you will see that Zen Dark mode is available, which looks like this. I prefer the light mode, so I will return to it. But by default, I will call out that we have an auto switching mode, which means that this configuration is going to be read from your system settings. Now, speaking of this new layout, we have like a somewhat airier menu and some new features that I will talk you through. So first things first, based on feedback and also some usage patterns that we observed, we expanded the module indexes by default. So you no longer have to click on module indexes first to be able to see the options. So for example, let me quickly land on the Bicep resource modules category. And here I can call out the major features of the new site design. So the table of contents on each of the pages have moved on, to the top bar here. So if you click on it, you see all the headings that are available in this page. Then you have a traditional breadcrumb navigation, which is then followed by a pencil icon. Of course, if you click on that, you will be led to the GitHub area that backs basically this page with a Markdown file. And then here we have a new feature, which is a printing feature. Basically, if you click on it, depending on where you are, you will always see that page and whatever content is below that page, hierarchically speaking, and it will be rendered in this flat list. So basically, you could just hit Control-P or use the print feature of your browser, and you could either print this content to paper or save it as a PDF file. And then you have some navigation buttons here, so you can move to the next or to the previous page relative to where you are currently standing. Now, we also do have a search feature, which is coming very handy when you want to look for any modules. So actually, let me demonstrate another feature that goes along with the search feature. So let's say I want to look for the virtual network module, but I'm not typing it up fully. I'm just typing VNet. So since we introduced alternative names for each modules, I can easily just type this short form, VNet, and then you can see that I have Terraform modules and Bicep modules. Both, I think I have some examples here, pattern modules and resource modules. So I'm going to click the Bicep resource modules for VNet. If I click on it, it's going to be highlighted down where it exists, which will be somewhere in the middle of this list. And as you can see, the full name of this resource is Virtual Network, but we added VNet as an alternative name. Another exciting thing that you can notice here is that now we have a list here, like a short list with one bullet point, which is subnet. This is for our new experiment, which we are conducting as we speak. So basically, we are thinking about introducing support for child modules. And the subnet child module happens to be one of the first things that we are focused at. So this is currently not clickable because the module is not available just yet. But once it will be published, this will automatically turn into a clickable link. All right, let's move on to the next topic. So specifications and definitions. So if you open that section and visit this main page for module specifications, you will be welcomed with this summary page. So here you can see for both Bicep and Terraform languages and all the language classifications, those being resource, pattern, and utility modules, we now have a number of categories that we broke down all our documentation to. So this allows you to have a sense of how many rules there are, or specifications as we call them, for each module in each of those given categories to follow. Now, every single specification that is backing this table has been migrated to a distinct Markdown page. And we are now using a new system where we basically tag every single one of them with relevant information. So let me show you how that works. So let's say that you are interested in contributing to a Bicep resource module, or you want to develop one from scratch. So all you need to do is find the related chapter here on the left. So I'm going to choose a Bicep resource module now, which leads me to a dedicated page where basically I can see all those categories that were listed in the previous table. I can also just click on the table of contents and I can see things like specifications related to contribution and support, telemetry, naming and consumption, etc. So every single one of these categories have their own summary table, and then you can see that for Bicep resource modules, for the contribution and support category, I basically have 9 specifications here. You can see their short title, as well as their severity, which for most of these just happens to be a must, but there will be other examples down here where the severity is should. There could be other examples where it's may. Then the other 2 columns that I have here is persona and lifecycle. So we are using these to kind of highlight who is this relevant for? Is this relevant for module owners only, or maybe also for contributors? And also at which segment of the module's lifecycle the given specification is mostly relevant for. Is it relevant at the beginning of the lifecycle? If yes, then it has an initial tag. Is it relevant in the middle or throughout the lifecycle? Then it has a business as usual or BAU tag. So basically, this allows you to understand regarding the role you are currently acting on behalf of, what are the specifications that are mainly relevant for you right now. Then down here, if you see, there is an expandable area. So if I click on that, then all of these specifications that were listed in this table of content style table, they are basically here with, or in all their glory and with all their content. Which is, of course, a long list. So if you want to actually land on any one of these as a dedicated page, you can just click on See Origin, which will then show you what are the tags that are applied to that related specification. You will see the content, and then down at the very bottom of the page, you will see when the content of the page was last modified. Now, this is, of course, a bit of a false positive, as we just bug updated everything as we went through this major website overhaul. But when you click on it, in essence, this will lead you to a Git history where you can see when and how that page was actually modified. So going back and speaking of this feature, I will actually navigate back to the root module specification page, where there is also a summary available in terms of when these specifications were recently modified. So if I expand that block, I will again, of course, see pretty much everything, because everything was tweaked and modified as part of this major website overhaul. But basically what you see here is the ID of the specification when it was last modified, and then you can see the full Git history and also just the last commit and what that involved. All right, and these are the most important updates from me today. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time.
Sorry, so I apologize for indeed the resolution, which was a bit high. Indeed, it was a recording from Mate, who lives on the West Coast, and I could not zoom myself, and actually I could not reply, otherwise it would have stopped the video. Sorry about that. I'll share the link to the video in a moment. And just one comment on all of these features. So of course there is some thinking behind it on how to provide you with the best experience. There's also some telemetry behind it. Like we look at how people use the website. And by the way, we have 54,000 unique users in January. So the awareness and the adoption is going fast now, is growing fast. And we look at the heat map, we look at where people go and what people try to find immediately and so on, and we restructure everything to try to make it as easy and convenient as possible. So we'll keep on updating the website. All right, so we're gonna switch to Alex and Jared. Alex and Jared, I'm gonna load through PowerPoint Live. It's gonna take a few seconds. And while I'm doing that, feel free to introduce maybe yourself.
Feel free also to just click through. I don't. That would also be fine. But anyways, yeah. Hello everybody. In case you don't know me, I'm Alex. I'm one of the maintainers on especially the Bicep side of the AVM initiative, primarily reviewing pull requests and working on the CI. Yeah, I don't know, Jared, if you want to quickly introduce yourself as well.
Yes, I'm also one of the tech leads for Azure Verified Modules, and I mainly work on the Terraform side, so things like CI/CD and the framework aspects.
So that was easy. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Then let's have a word on child modules. So it has been a much requested feature for quite some time, to be fair, not just since, at least on the bicep side, since the Camel days, but we have since also received quite a lot of requests for specific child modules, but also in general for making those available for scenarios where you would, for example, and this was the example taken before, you would only want to deploy a subnet, for example, not the entire VNet, for cases where you don't have necessarily access to or permissions to deploy the entire VNet. So we've been trying to work on this for some time. Truth be told, it's a bit more complicated, unfortunately, to publish anything into the public registry as opposed to private registry, where you can essentially just shove it in there. In the public registry, we have certain, let's say, process steps that we have to follow, which are in part manual and which we try to overcome for quite some time now. There was some recent progress on that front. I'm going to talk about that in a second a bit more. But this is why it currently gets some traction. That is also why we hope to be able to enable this actually for broad adoption quite soon. So the idea for the way it's supposed to work for the bicep side, at least, once it is available, is that module owners or contributors for that matter would need to essentially put the version.json file into the child module that they want to publish. Right now, every parent module has that. Let's say key vault module has a version.json file. And if you would also want to publish the key module, for example, whoever would essentially just need to add a version.json file to that key module as well, which will then essentially tell the CI, okay, I'm supposed to publish this one too. And the idea here naturally is that both the key module in this case, as well as the key vault module, would need to, well, maintain their own version file. Likewise, if you would update, for example, or add a breaking change to the key module, would need to update both the version.json file of that key module and the parent. Something which we try to make a bit easier to understand also with another feature that René is currently working on, that I think we're going to get to later with a changelog. But long story short, at the end of the day, it should be very seamless to do that, and we would invite essentially all the module owners, for example, to publish their child modules by just adding those version.json files in there. But now we split this whole thing into 3 phases fundamentally, as you see in the middle: a POC, a pilot, and a bulk. So what stands behind this is that in the POC, as the name may give away, we are currently trying to enable the feature fundamentally, using the subnet module then as the POC to actually run through the process end to end. This contains stuff like adding a first couple set of tests to ensure that, for example, certain updates happen, that the version.json file is in the format it's supposed to be, and so on and so forth. And then when we move to the actual pilot phase, it's essentially broadening the whole thing. So assuming that the publishing did work, we would then look into the documentation. We would look into more validation steps. We would look into actually onboarding the modules to the MAR file, something I'm going to go into a bit more detail in a second, which is one of those manual steps right now. And we would, as it says there, do a selected publishing. So we said, okay, to test it in a bit broader scale, let's take all the current requests for child modules, which are, for example, let's say 10, without knowing the exact number, and also publish all of those. And they've been requested anyways to further validate that it works. And once that checks out, then we would essentially make the feature in general available. We move last couple blockers right now, which we put in place to not mess up the process, and essentially enable everybody to, on the one hand, request obviously child modules if you're not owning a module, or to, well, invite, as I said, the module owners to themselves add the version.json files to all their child modules. So there are a couple of remaining challenges, some of which we may or may not be able to resolve. And one main thing I just want to briefly touch on is that MAR file. So it's essentially a file where all the modules which are published need to be listed before they are published. The publishing would still work without the listing in there. The problem is it wouldn't show up for a user. So it's super, super important that we have all modules that we want to have in the public registry in that file before publishing that module. And while this is quite easy, let's say for the top level modules, going through the current module proposal process on the AVM side, which some of you may have seen, where essentially, for example, Mate has time to actually onboard the module to the MAR file. It's a bit more complicated in cases of child modules where you could add a version of JSON file to any child module at any point in time. So what we want to do here, or we got some traction on, is to actually validate against the MAR file, being able to automatically test against. So the CI would actually be able to validate, okay, the module is actually not existing there currently, so we should not publish and would essentially fail a test. So that's one very important one. And the second one would then be a scalable approach towards that onboarding. As you can imagine, there are a lot of child modules in theory that could be published. And to put them all in the MAR file manually is a bit of a chore, let's say. Plus, it's also not really reliable because, as you can imagine, we could, in theory, put all the resource types in there today, but there are more resource types being added over time to any resource provider. So it would run to become outdated quite fast. So that's something we essentially going to tackle afterwards. But the more important one would be the validation first, and then go from there. John, I hope this answered your question. But yeah, just to quickly recap, yeah, it's essentially just a file containing all the listings of all the published modules, so that they are then available from the public registry. Good, Jared, I would hand over to you. Sorry, and if you have any questions, feel free obviously to shoot them in chat. I'm happy to reply.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So Terraform, it's slightly easier because there's built-in support in the registry for submodules, and submodules are a well-established thing in Terraform. So in terms of the progress with Terraform, we've had some modules that have had submodules for some time now. I think the first one was the VNet module, where we added the peering and the subnet submodules, and that's been out for quite a long time now and been in use. So we're good from a technical testing perspective. We also had to update our CI and testing framework to make sure it worked with the submodules as well. So it does all the linting and the other test static analysis on the submodules as well, and builds the documentation and things like that. The bit that we haven't done yet is update the specs. So in the AVM website that Mate just shared, we need to add a section in there to be explicit about submodules and the requirements around submodules. But having said that, technically it's ready to go. If you want to build a submodule, you can build one now. We're happy to support that. There's a number of examples out there. So I mentioned VNet already, but there's also NetApp files is an example, storage accounts, V1 module. They've all got submodules if you want to look at examples of submodules and how they've been implemented. But just go over to the side here, I'll just go into a bit of the technical details. So this is, apologies if this is a bit small, but this is the virtual network module. You can see there's a folder here called modules. That folder will be there by default in the template, just empty. And basically, you just need to put subfolders underneath that with your submodules in, and they will then be published as submodules by default. There's nothing else you need to do there. So the name of the subfolder under modules is basically the name of the module, and that's how it'll be referenced from the registry. Again, sorry about this being a bit small, but you can see here in the registry, there's a drop down that will appear if you have got submodules, and you can drop down and you can click through to the submodule and find the documentation, the inputs and outputs and everything else about that submodule will be available there. And this is an example of what one of those looks. So this is the subnet module for Terraform. You can't see this because it's so small, but there's a link there to show you how to actually reference the module directly in your module source parameter. And then there's all the documentation that you would expect with any module is in there as well. So this is kind of a preview of the specs rather than anything that we've put technically in place. So like there's going to be some constraints about how submodules have to be used in Terraform, and we'll have some peer review around some of these and some static analysis where we can. But basically, the first one here must only be used for true child resources. So if you look in Azure Resource Manager, in the API reference, you'll see that some resources are truly child resources. They're nested under in the documentation. You can only use that resource if you've got one of the parent resources, basically. So an example being a subnet of a VNet, you can't use a subnet. You can't create a subnet outside of a VNet. Therefore, that's a candidate for a submodule. If another example, if we were doing diagnostic settings on a VNet, that is not sorry, that's a bad example. A private endpoint on a storage account would not be a true child module, because you can deploy that endpoint separately, or a DNS zone, something like that. There's going to be, going forward, we want people to create submodules. So where there are child resources, we'll say you should create a submodule for that. We'll probably not enforce it from day one, but we'll say, yeah, you should create a submodule so that people can use that independently of the parent module. A submodule is basically, if you're familiar with developing an AVM, the submodule rules around all the specs and everything is exactly the same, right? So you'll see these files in here look familiar. We've still got the documentation, we've got the inputs and the outputs. Everything about a submodule follows the same specifications as a parent module. There's no difference. You have to have an ID and a name output, for example. All of those things apply. So a submodule can be used in isolation, but it follows the AVM spec. And if you are creating a submodule, you must reference it from the parent module, right? So you must allow it to be used via the parent module, so that you can atomically create whatever it is from the parent, but also choose to optionally create that thing separately as well. And in that case, it should be an optional variable. So if you don't want to create subnets at the same time as a VNet, you can choose not to do that. And then, sorry, this is just a point. You can, once you've published a submodule, you can then reference it directly from the registry, right? So you don't need to do anything with VNets to create a subnet, basically, to use that module, right? You don't need to know anything about what the VNet module is doing to use the subnet module. That's everything. So please go and have a look at what we've done already in the examples I mentioned, and please try it out. If you're a module owner, please have a look at if there's any child resources for your resource and start having a look at refactoring that into submodules. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Alex. Yeah. Moving on to the next topic, which is OpenID Connect with Erica. Erica, please take it over.
Yes, I just took over. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I am Erica. I'm one of the AVM SMEs, and also specifically for the bicep part of it. And today I'm going to walk you through the OpenID Connect update that we recently introduced in our CR environment in VRM. I'm gonna quickly touch on the implementation, the underlying implementation that we set up in upstream VRM, and then proceed with the adoption possibilities for if you are a module contributor, an AVM contributor, how you can basically set up that same implementation in your fork, and also briefly touch on the timeline for this implementation. Now, talking about the underlying implementation, this is fairly standard. You would need to implement and deploy a user assigned identity on which we are going to assign, and we had to assign airbag control on a specific scope that in your case can be usually a subscription, but in some cases, depending on the resources that you are going to deploy in your test, can be also a different scope, like management group scope. And then most importantly, we require to set up federated credentials towards the CI/CD provider that in our case is GitHub. In that phase, you will need also to select an identity, an entity for that authentication that in our case is GitHub environment. In this environment, we will need to create 3 environment secrets that you will see here in the middle. And they are these validate client ID, subscription ID, and tenant ID. As you can see, we don't anymore required to set up secrets for the actual secret of the identity, because that is exactly what OEDC is for. Now, how to implement the same in your fork? We have basically two options. You can go through our Bicep contribution step-by-step guidelines, where you can basically through ClickOps all the steps and the guidelines with screenshot and really understand what is the process to get there. Or if you are part of the lazy team, we also have automation in place. Specifically, we have this PowerShell helper script. Credits to Jack for that. That will basically do that same for you in your fork. Now, talking about the timeline, this is something already active. We implemented that mid-January. Last month, we introduced that, but it's not a breaking change for now, meaning we are currently supporting both authentication methods towards Azure. It's both the old method, service principal and secret, and the OADC. We deprecated the previous method, so service principal and secret, but we are still supporting that. What does that mean? That BRM upstream is using OEDC, but for how the pipelines are implemented, until you set up that in your fork, your pipelines will still work using the setup service principal and secret. Now, by the end of April, we decided to decommission the old method, service principal and secret, and that would be a breaking change, meaning that once we basically decommission the service principal, you will be forced to use OEDC in order to use the same workflows in your environment. So please, if you are a module contributor, you can start today to set that up in your fork so that you will be ready for end of April. We are giving, let's say, 3 months for that is quite a long time. And also, if you face any issues with your specific resource type to use OEDC, please reach out, because we, of course, also have the chance to have exceptions to that, but they would need to be particular exceptions only. That was it from me. Please reach out in the chat if you need anything.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All right, so moving on to the next topic with Brett Miller, who is a cloud platform engineer at Capgemini and Microsoft MVP. A lot of experience. I heard you're a PowerShell guru as well. So Jack was supposed to be your host today, but he has an emergency, so unfortunately we cannot have Jack in this call today. Brett, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly, and I can see you also on. So please take it away for your experience with inner sourcing.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I reached out to Jack just to discuss the kind of inner sourcing story around something I've been working on, but also kind of an evolution of how you adopt inner sourcing in enterprises as a whole. And I think I reached out originally to the product team, I think during the Carmel days of but the precursor to AVM, around how you internalize these modules for use within an enterprise. And ultimately, I'm a huge advocate for inner sourcing anyway. So to discuss inner sourcing quickly, the GitHub definition, if you look on GitHub, is it's a development methodology where engineers build proprietary software using best practices from large-scale open source projects. What that means in an enterprise is that you generally have to make a huge cultural shift, especially in large enterprises where I predominantly work. Just for some context, I've kind of worked on 3, I think now, land and zone implementations in various guises. So all in Bicep. So the Bicep modules are kind of close to what I'm working on. But to adopt an inner source in an enterprise, there's a couple of bullet points there around what the benefits of that are. Secure coding practices, bringing modules internal to the organization instead of going out to the public registry all the time. It's a reliability, bringing those modules in-house so you have full control over those, who can access them, when they can be accessed. A lot of the organizations I work for are high security environments, so getting approval to go out to the internet to pull things in is quite difficult. The risk reduction, so having access to these internal modules allows you full control over the security controls that are in there. Obviously, the AVM modules, if you've used them, they're generic intentionally so that anybody can use them for any use case. That isn't always the best case for promoting a lot of enterprises. Sorry, the sun's right in my eyes. And then again, the adopting the whole inner sourcing model. You might not have a massive team where you're implementing these things, so widening the net a little bit. You might have development teams who are capable of doing infrastructure deployments, but previously the organizational structure wasn't set up to allow that. So adopting an inner sourcing model might help the team, if it's particularly small, to get over some of the barriers of how you deploy infrastructure. And self-service, which I think is one of the key benefits. If you're a platform team of maybe a couple of engineers and you build a scalable set of modules or patterns or resource modules similar to what's available on the AVM registry, enabling that self-service element where people can just build their own infrastructure is huge for a time saving for the team anyway. I pasted that as a hyperlink in the deck. I don't know if that's clickable on live.
Should be, yeah.
Yeah, but I can post the link anyway. There's a good Azure Architecture Center document which kind of covers a lot of this stuff, which I actually found after I'd made the presentation whilst I was Googling for some stuff. So it's quite a good use case if you want to have a look at that. If you want to go to the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this was a quick architectural rundown of kind of what we settled upon in the organization I'm working for at the moment. This is an ongoing journey. We're in an environment where there's a landing zone implemented. It's not all greenfield. We haven't just taken the accelerator and run that. A lot of it was created prior to the AVM modules being available or in existence. Bicep was still fairly new, so there's a lot of bespoke infrastructure as code and pipelines and all the various things. So we're taking elements of this and kind of trying to carve it up into manageable chunks at the moment. We tried a few different things. I think some of the developers internally are currently using template specs, which I didn't understand the decision behind. There was no reason. I think it was just an opinion that they thought they wanted to use those. If you've used template specs before, there's obviously a few caveats with that. In that templates are classed as link templates, and they're not nested, which if you've run into some of the file size limits, if you're deploying quite a large workload, that can get quite complex. And I think the key thing for me was when I had a look at the template specs they were using, they were publishing the template specs, but when you had a look at the template specs, they were still going out to the to the public AVM MCR registry. And the scaffolding that was required to publish those, you basically had a pipeline for each of the template specs which published those, and then you had consumers of those, so you basically ended up with twice as many pipelines. So yeah, not in this organization, but previous organizations, we've used Git repos extensively for managing shared modules and patterns and templates, the same as pipeline templates, and governing those with pipeline template extensions. So you had that governance in from the start. It works well if you don't have many patterns to follow. So the problem you run into with Git repos, ironically, is that you end up in a versioning nightmare where how do you keep the main source up to date with versions if they're just being pulled from a Git repo? If another team has a dependency on an older version, you end up with multiple branches and various things, and it just gets quite complex quite quickly. If the link in the previous slide, which takes you to that story, recommends using Azure Container Registry to publish your bicep modules, which has been around for quite a while, and I think it's used quite extensively. The part that kind of reaches back to the template specs again is how do you internalize those? You end up with a bunch of scaffolding and CI/CD pipelines which pull them in, run a bunch of tests, some template analyzers, and then publish those. So I reached out to the team actually during the Carmel stage, and I think there used to be a huge PowerShell ecosystem on how you internalize those modules and publish them to your own container registry. And then one of the team reached out and says, have you tried the Azure Container Registry? Sorry, is it Artifact Registry? Artifact Registry Proxy Cache, a combination of those words. The little icon above the ACRs in the diagram there. And what that does is basically allows you to proxy the MCR bicep cache, and you give it a feed. It's unauthenticated, not authenticated, so it just allows you to proxy those, and then in your bicep code you reference your internal ACR, and then the first time you use that, it caches that module with that pinned version, similar to how most containers work. The beauty of that is the time it takes to get a workable internal number of templates for use is reduced dramatically. You don't have the pipelines to deploy those. You're still using the public registry. You can pull changes in quickly. You can pin to versions. It gives you all of the nice things to have when deploying the modules. The diagram I've drawn there, we hit on quite nicely in that managed DevOps pools came out at around the same time we were implementing the build agents for the platform in infrastructure as code, so that reduced the overhead quite extensively. We had already started writing some code for scale sets, so that reduced the amount of work we had to do. But ultimately, the user story here was the security. How do we give developers access to this shared internal inner sourced model? And the model we're currently looking at, which is mostly implemented, that we're currently going through validation with, is having two ACRs, one for dev and one for prod. Developers have ACR pull access to the dev container registry. That allows them to do the AZ bicep build and restore locally with those permissions. And then only the DevOps pools production build agents identities have access to the production one. So there's that separation there from a security perspective. And then again, all the best at the OIDC for the workload identity federation for all of the deployments and things. Yeah, there's a bit of an issue with the deployment that we ran into, because we started with doing this, and then we built the bicep templates to deploy all of this into the environment. You run into a bit of a BCDR scenario where there's a chicken and egg kind of scenario where you need to deploy the bicep registry so that the rest of the modules can use the internal module, but the bicep registry needs to pull from the public module, the public registry, to be able to deploy itself. So we've built the templates to deploy that first in a kind of a DR scenario, and then the rest of the modules for the platform can pull from that internal module, the internal registry. One of the things we also ran into is when doing this in bicep, you can use the AVM module for container registry, but the proxy cache and the subsequent resources underneath require you to deploy a key vault and a secret, even though the MCR registry's public. You don't need authentication for that. So we got around that by using the AVM modules for the container registry, and then just using the resource modules, just the resources underneath, and then it meant we didn't have to deploy unnecessary resources, the key vault and things that we then had to manage. So possibly want a feedback to the AVM owner for that, to see if we can get around that. so we can use the AVM modules for everything. But yeah, immediately after deploying this, the next thing that I tried, just because I've done this in the past, is can you proxy a proxy? So I tried deploying a container registry, which proxies the internal one, but it's currently set up so it only supports Docker, MCR, GitHub Container Registry, and a few others. So you can't internalize your own internalized proxy. I'm not sure if there's a use case for that. I just know I've done it in the past, and it was just fun to see if it worked. But yeah, overall, this is an ongoing journey. It'd be interesting to hear other people's thoughts around how they're adopting inner sourcing going forward. For me, this seems like the most logical pattern to follow. It's the least amount of effort, especially if you're working in a small team, which my current client is. But overall, the key thing is about making all of this visible to your internal development teams, allowing the collaboration, allowing them to see how you're deploying everything and being able to contribute to that. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know how
Thank you,
long I
Brett.
went.
No, great. Yeah, for any questions, please put them on the chat. Pankaj just pinging me saying, "Hey, how are we going on time?" So I want to ask. So thank you so much, Brett. Thank you so much for this. This was really insightful. There are many answers for inner sourcing. We want to tackle that topic for sure, and we want to do that with the community. So it's extremely valuable that some of you are already working on that. One question to our entity speakers, Reza and Mike. Do you have time to go after the hour, or should we switch a little bit the topics and you could go now just to make sure
Let's switch. Let's switch. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Pankaj, I think you're on the call now. If you are, let me just put the slides and then I'll let you introduce Reza and Mike.
Okay, thanks a lot, Charlie. Morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Pankaj Meshram, I'm one of the PMs in AVM, look after the Terraform side of it. And we have the pleasure of having guests from NTT, Mohammed Reza Kashtil and Mike Wendt. They have been leveraging AVM for their implementations, so it would be great to hear about their experience. So with that, Mike and Reza, if maybe you can introduce yourself and provide an overview of your roles in NTT.
Yeah, so then I will start. So thank you for the invite, Pankaj. Yeah, so my name is Mike Wendt. I'm from the NTT Data, working mainly as a cloud solution architect. And in parallel, I'm also lead the Azure capability from NTT Data in the DACH region. And then I would hand over to you, Reza.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks for having us here as guest speaker. Reza Gashtil is my name, and I'm a cloud solution architect at NTT Data. I've been working in different areas, cloud technologies, platform engineering, automation via infrastructure as code, and operation and monitoring. So yeah, that's let's say that my focus area and interest, and this is the part that we have, let's say, the engagement and the connection to the Azure VM, Azure Verified Modules using Terraform.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Reza. With that, would you like to tell us how did you discover AVM, and why did you decide to use the modules in your projects?
Yeah, sure. So we discovered the AVMs during one of our Azure capability calls at the beginning of 2024, when you also announced that via the newsletter from Microsoft. And in parallel, luckily we started also a project in the financial sector, where we decide, hey, we want to adopt this mechanism and the idea behind it, because we were tasked to set up a cloud platform for the customer, which is based on the building block concept.
Wonderful, wonderful. With that, can you maybe give us some example of couple of maybe some AVM modules that you're already using within the projects where you maybe name of couple of resources or particular modules which you are experiencing with your customer projects right now?
Sure. Basically, we are using AVMs in three different ways. The first and the most obvious one is using them for infrastructure as code, so directly referencing the Terraform modules in our Terraform code. And for these use cases, we are, let's say, mainly using the resource modules, so the fine granular components. These are, let's say, the most popular and commonly used services like Key Vault, ACRs, virtual network that, let's say, you need them in every and each landing zone, as well as for the application and subscription. So this is one way of using the AVMs. The other way is that we also develop our Terraform modules, where, let's say, we cannot use the AVMs, or they are not mature enough, or the customer wants us to have their specific version. Here we have also inspired and somehow adopt the template specification and the blueprint that are provided for AVM modules. So this is also a second way that we are using that, because we can use the whole, let's say, framework and the blueprint. We don't need to reinvent all these, let's say, documentation, coding convention, and also the integration with the CI/CD pipelines. And the last one, which is not very obvious, perhaps it was not, let's say, on your agenda, but we thought it is a nice side effect. We use it for education and training our juniors. That means instead of creating on our content and giving and producing examples and code snippet and so on, and as we are adopting this framework, it is compatible with the other two aforementioned efforts, that we try this to educate our juniors, to give them the best in class references and examples. And it has also increased the learning curve and the quality of skill set that they acquired in a time slot that we, in comparison to the, let's say, alternatives that we already, let's say, tried out. So that's also something that I would like to give feedback on that, perhaps we can take this into the consideration for further community calls.
Wonderful, wonderful, and it's great to see that you have managed to find different use cases within the AVM modules, right? As you mentioned, the direct use case, references, and then being inspired from it to develop customer specific, and you didn't stop there, and also use it for your own educational purposes. I know we were having a couple of chats before this, and for the benefit of our audience, would you like to share a customer story, a successful story where you had a very good experience of AVM, or challenging experiences with AVM, and you managed to measure some impacts out of it as well, right?
Yes, we as at Entity, we have a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's called Altemista. It's the code name, and we are building and running this on different hyperscalers as well as private cloud. And we have decided to use AVMs as building blocks for the next generation of this platform, the specific flavor on AKS and Azure. So we are now, let's say, evaluating the AVMs for each components and building block that we are using in this whole platform, managed platform. Until now, we are very positively surprised that even the original version was not thought about using AVMs, but since it was modular and based on the building blocks concept, we can somehow one-to-one replace the building blocks with the AVMs, or with, let's say, not that much effort. So till now, as I said, the basic resource modules like Key Vault, ACRs, networking, DNS zones, and so on, so the most common one, are mainly practicable and possible to use them. And we can also, let's say, measure the productivity and increase of productivity and velocity, as well as the let's say, the quality that we have in the first run, as we, let's say, integrate the modules and they are, let's say, up and running. And this is let's say, thanks to the quality and clear specification and clear API and intuitive interfaces, that less ambitious, let's say, confusion and less trial is needed. Let's say we will directly benefit from this approach.
That's great to hear, Reza. My last question would be, since you have learned or you had some journey in adopting the AVM modules, and you're still in progress to develop multiple projects behind the scenes, what advice would you like to give to other organizations who are trying to adopt Azure Verified Modules?
Yeah, so from our side, the advice would be, hey, please join this. That's a good initiative to increase standards, especially for the infrastructure as code. I don't know how is it for the other peoples on this call. When we start our journeys at customer side for setting up cloud platforms or applications, multiple times we starting on a green field. And from that point, it accelerates the speed for delivering our projects to the customers, which helped us and also the customers to understanding, hey, how is this working? What I need to take care of for the setup, and what is a standard, the best practice and also the best in class norm. Yeah, that's our advice.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your stories, Mike and Reza. With that, I would like to thank you, both of you, and appreciate all the insights that you have shared with this group. Thank you so much for joining, and over to you, Charlie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us here.
We appreciate your presence as well. So moving on. So indeed, we had told you at the very beginning we're gonna go beyond the full hour most likely. Again, if you need to drop, please do. Everything is recorded and we'll post that on YouTube. Okay. Jared, do you want to continue on this big news with the Terraform AVM for platform landing zone?
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to take control, hopefully. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So week before last, we announced that the Azure landing zones, platform landing zone, now is made up of Azure Verified Modules. So we composed together Azure Verified Modules, and we have a new name for it, which is a bit of a mouthful, but this is what it is. It's Azure Verified Modules for platform landing zones, and this will apply to both Terraform and Bicep. So what is it? basically we've got 3 main categories of modules that we compose together to build that platform landing zone. If you're not familiar with ALZ, then we've got lots of documentation around it that you can have a look and understand what a platform landing zone is, what an application landing zone is. So we're focused on the platform landing zone, which is like the hub of your Azure deployment. So we've got management groups and policies, which are serviced by this new module called AVM PTN ALZ. And this builds the management group hierarchy, the policy definitions and assignments and role assignments associated with those policies. We've got management resources, which is the log analytics workspace, data collection rules and managed identities that are used by AMA, Azure Monitoring Agent. And then we've got a choice. You can choose between hub and spoke virtual network with mesh peering, or you can choose virtual WAN for a more managed experience. Both of these deploy very similar things. You just choose one or the other and compose those modules together. You can see some of the modules that are used there to compose those together. So this is the modules. If you want to use them independently, you can use them independently and just deploy the bit that you want. You don't need to deploy everything. So why did we do this? So our largest customers were looking for a more modular approach. So they didn't, the existing CAF module, if you're familiar with it, is a monolithic. It deploys everything, it does everything. And they wanted to pick and choose which bits to deploy when and where. We were also reaching the limits of what was possible to do with that Terraform module. It's complex designing that management group hierarchy and assigning the policies to it. It's not as simple as it could be with Terraform. So we needed to do something different there to be able to continue to support that. And you know, although we've got that composable approach, that's like an advanced use case, right? Those large customers have got a lot of people, a lot of resources to be able to do that and manage it themselves. But we also provide an accelerator, which provides an opinionated approach. It's the equivalent of what the CAF module was doing. It builds those modules together for you. And it also has the benefit of bootstrapping your continuous delivery and version control system as well. So yeah, there's 2 approaches, like I just touched on. You can either choose to use the accelerator. We aim to cover 80% of use cases with the accelerator, probably more, in fact. Or you can choose to do it yourself. You can take all those modules that I just talked about and you can use them independently, compose them together yourself. The choice is yours. And we do provide some documentation around that. So what are the benefits of moving to the new design? So as I mentioned before, we were hitting the limits of what Terraform is capable of in some of the things we were trying to achieve. So we actually built a provider, the ALZ provider, to help us build that hierarchy and do a lot of checks and balances against the policy configuration, the role assignments of policies, everything like that is built into this provider, and that significantly simplifies the Terraform work that we have to do. That provider leverages a new library. So now we have a library of all our policy definitions and policy assignments. We've got we can support different libraries now. So we've got an Amber library for Azure monitoring baseline alerts. We've also got our sovereign landing zones team. They've got their own library as well in there. So we can have a single source of truth for all of the Azure landing zone policy assignments and definitions. So moving forwards, Bicep will use this, and we're hoping to be able to use it for the portal as well. We have the new ALZ module, which is used for deploying the landing zone hierarchy as well. We're using AZ API on that, which makes it a lot faster to deploy. If you're familiar with the old module, it could take a very long time to deploy some of the policy definitions and things like that. It's a lot faster with AZ API. And this module is a lot simpler to maintain from our perspective as well, because all the complexity is abstracted away in the provider now. The accelerator, because we're using AVM, we've been able to build new features into that platform landing zone. So on the first release, we introduced Bastion host and private DNS resolver, and we've got more new features coming, and it'll be a lot easier to build those in moving forwards. So the library, already touched on this. This is a single source of truth for those policy, well, for the management group hierarchy and the policy definitions and assignments that are installed at the different levels of that hierarchy. And like I said, we're trying to make that agnostic so that any IAC that deploys the landing zone can leverage it. So currently we're working on the Bicep implementation, which will also leverage this library. And the library is extensible, right? So you could create your own version of the library if you want to, that has your own custom things in it. So we are looking at the migration as well, because obviously customers have deployed using the CAF Enterprise Scale module, and we want to help them to migrate. So before we deprecate that module, we're going to have a migration path and hopefully some tooling available. So we're still ironing out the exactly how that's going to work, but we've got a couple of stages of migration. So the management group hierarchy, and then we've got to look at the connectivity, which is the more complicated piece, which might involve some state migration, some moved blocks being generated for you, things like that. So we are looking at that migration approach, and we'll be putting something out in the next couple of months. So just if you're not familiar with the accelerator, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what that is and how it works. I'm trying to be as fast as I can, sorry, I appreciate we're late. So basically you provide 2 configuration files, a bootstrap config file and a platform landing zone config file. They get fed into a PowerShell module, which we publish in the public gallery. That then deploys a bootstrap, which includes a VCS repository with a pre-composed module, Terraform module in this case, with all of those things that we talked about. And then in the config, you can choose between hub and spoke networking or virtual WAN. And you can also choose lots of different options inside here, which I'll touch on in a minute. But we bootstrap Azure DevOps or GitHub. We also can output it to the file system, so you can bootstrap your own version control system like GitLab or whatever you might be using. So at a very high level, I appreciate the slide's a bit busy, so I'll be as quick as I can. But the documentation is probably one of the most important pieces of the accelerator. We've got a comprehensive user guide that takes you step by step through everything you need to do and every decision that you need to make. And then we've got more detailed documentation on that platform landing zone module, that pre-composed module that tells you exactly what everything's doing and links you off to all the relevant documentation. You can find the docs over here. Those 2 configuration files that I already touched on are then orchestrated by the PowerShell module, and that bootstraps the environment. So the accelerated documentation, the user guide takes you through 4 phases. There's a planning phase where you make a bunch of decisions about your bootstrap and a bunch of decisions about your platform landing zone. There are some prerequisites you need to set up. So we do need like a seed identity, and you also need to create your free platform subscriptions, identity management, and connectivity. Then you get those configuration files, feed them into the accelerator, and run your bootstrap, and that will deploy some. It'll configure your version control system, and it'll deploy some resources into Azure to manage state and things like that. So this bootstrapping, when that's complete, everything is hooked up. There's no manual steps in that process. Everything is ready to go. So you can go straight in to phase 3, and all you need to do is trigger the continuous delivery pipeline, and it will immediately deploy your platform landing zone for you. So this is designed to be easy for people to use that are maybe not so familiar with Terraform. So what have we added in the latest release? The accelerator, if you're familiar with it, it used to have YAML and some JSON files for the config, and that was difficult to maintain. So we've moved to TFVARs, obviously native Terraform. That means that it retains any comments or ordering or changes that a customer has made to that configuration file. And it's now very easy to continue to update that configuration file moving forward. And it's also a lot easier for us to test internally, which is great as well. We've added a phase 0, so phase 0 didn't exist before this latest release, and it's a step-by-step guide taking you through all the decisions you need to make about the bootstrap, all the decisions you need to make about the platform landing zone as well. And we've introduced a concept of options and scenarios. So I appreciate this is probably a bit small here. I'm not going to go through these in depth, but basically when you come in to run the accelerator, you choose between one of our 7 scenarios. So you might want to choose hub and spoke networking with an Azure firewall, or you might want to choose virtual WAN with a third-party MVA. We give you a starting config for that. That starting config is ready to go out of the box. You don't need to make any changes to it, but you can make changes to it, and that's what the options are. So the options are what we commonly see customers ask for in our engagements with customers. So things like renaming management groups, right? That's probably the most common ask. Renaming resources to fit your naming convention. We take you through step by step how to change those things in the configuration files. Turning off a DDoS protection plan if you're not ready for that yet. So that's all in the documentation as well. So you can augment it to be how you want it to be, basically, before you run it. Okay, that was the end of my part. Is Matt on the call or?
No, it's no longer on the call. I mean, because you already talked about migration, do you want to add a few words here, or we keep that for the next community call? Up to you, Jared.
Yeah, we can. I think Matt's got an opinion on this, but what Matt was going to talk about was generically how you migrate from existing Terraform code to AVM. So you might have deployed Terraform using other open source modules or your own modules, and you might want to migrate to AVM modules. So Matt was going to talk about how you can do that either by redeployment, if that's possible, if it's sort of an ephemeral thing, or if a stateless thing, I should say, or it was going to talk about state migration and how you can use move blocks or import and remove blocks in combination to achieve refactoring. So I'm not going to go into depth on this. Matt will touch on this another time, but hopefully that'll be a subject that's of interest in the future.
Sounds good.
And then I think it's Jack's section. Should I cover that as well?
I'm gonna switch.
Okay.
Or do you want to cover it, or I play the video from?
If you've got video at the end, then do that. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just switch to this one. Right, and you should hear the video in a second.
Do you hear that, Charlie? We can't hear that.
Sorry, you could not hear the video?
No.
Sorry about that. I did include the sound, so I'm not sure. Sorry about that, and I could not see that. All right. Then maybe.
Shall I just talk to the slide instead for
Yeah.
now? We can share Jack's video afterwards.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jared. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah. So we've released Terraform, like I said earlier, in January. We're working on the MVP for Bicep. So Bicep is going to use Azure Verified Modules for the platform landing zone. We're getting close to the point where we're going to be able to start getting people to look at it, and we're looking for people that are interested in testing that. So if you're a Bicep user of Azure landing zones and you want to test the new all singing, all dancing AVM version, then please get in touch. There's a QR code there that you can scan to sign up. We also recently released a new version of the existing ALZ Bicep, which added some new features. So the virtual network gateway IP configuration names, being able to update those. I think that was a long-standing ask. There were some DNS zones, some private endpoint DNS zones, which were missing from the policy assignment, so they've been added in as well. That list of DNS zones evolves over time, so we have to keep it updated. There were some Azure monitoring agent policies, the role assignments on them weren't quite correct at the correct level of the hierarchy. So they've also been fixed as well. So that was the most recent release there. Oh yeah, so there was an issue with the accelerator, which was caused by a bug in the Azure PowerShell module, which was causing deployments to fail. We recommended to customers that had to pin to a specific version of the AZ PowerShell module, which required them to update their continuous delivery pipeline configuration. But with the release of 13.1, that issue has now been resolved, so you no longer have to do that. So that was the other release there. I think that was everything.
Thank you, Darren.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we're getting to our last topic with René. Please, René, take it over.
Thank you. My name is René Heger. I'm also part of the AVM core team, and I would like to talk a little bit about what we have in the pipeline. So we are aiming for providing the best possible experience for you using the modules or developing them. So what I'm currently working on is the documentation for the CI, continuous integration pipeline. Documenting that so it is easier to understand what is going on behind the scenes, because the CI environment is a very important part of AVM modules. They ensure that we have a good quality, that repeatable deployments can happen and all that stuff, and that the quality in terms of documentation is the same every time you check something in. And I'm also working on changelogs. So there was the ask in the chat about version 1.0. This is also part of it. So we would like to offer the best experience. We have some things that we have on our checklist to have ready for the 1.0 release. And the changelogs is one of them. And I'm working on that right now. So the idea is that module contributors and owners, when they do a PR, can easily add some things to changelogs, which change for the next version. So it is easier for users then to see if it makes sense to upgrade to a new version, if it would break something, if they need to take care of something else. And the last thing here is the resource-derived types, which is not part of AVM, but part of BICEP. But we would like to be able to use that in AVM modules as well. So the idea is there that existing types, which are already defined by the PGs for the resource providers, can be leveraged in other modules as well. So right now we can provide user-defined types by creating them with the properties, with the values that we think might make sense for using AVM modules. But this is additional work. And if we could just leverage the existing types, this would make things easier for users who can then leverage the types and not have to fill out some object or array where you need to guess what the properties are that you can specify. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, René. Thanks a lot. We're reaching the end of this session. I want to thank all the speakers, external and all the team members who contributed to this presentation. We had a lot of topics, maybe a bit too many, but again, the recording is going to be published and shared very shortly. Someone was asking earlier on about the chat. The chat is closed at the end of this meeting, but I posted the GitHub issue where you can propose topics for this session, but we can leave it open and continue the conversation as well. Again, thank you very much. Happy to we could have so many of you today, and talk to you for the next community call. Thank you again, everyone.